Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today we're gonna be taking a look at the brand new Stagg Bourbon Batch 24B. This is clocking in at 127.8 proof or 63.9% ABV. It's coming to us from the Buffalo Trace Distillery, and it utilizes the mash bill number 1 recipe, which is the lower rye bourbon mash bill. You're also gonna find this mash bill used in the standard Buffalo Trace bourbon, Eagle Rare, Colonel E.H. Taylor, at least some of the E.H. Taylors, George T. Stagg, among other releases from Buffalo Trace. And before we go any further, I do want to say a very special thank you to a friend of mine, friend of the channel, Patreon supporter, Discord moderator, Justin. Thank you, Justin, for lending me this bottle for this review. But now, guys, it's time to get into this. We're not going to do any comparisons in this video. I've done quite a few comparisons already on a live stream, and I'll probably reference those at some point as we go through the nose, palate, finish review of this whiskey, but we're gonna try to keep this on the shorter side and just focus on this 24B. So without further ado, let's check this out on the nose. All right, guys, so first impression on this Stagg 24B is actually a very, very good one. There's one small complaint that I'm gonna probably just go ahead and start off with, which is that there's kind of this watermelon Jolly Rancher note on the nose, and it makes it feel a little bit young, a little bit bright and sour. But after you get past that note, and after you let this whiskey sit in the glass for about 20 minutes and that note kind of rolls off a little bit, you get into just a very sweet and very balanced version of Stagg. So there are, in my mind, a few different kind of standard profiles you can get with these Stagg releases. Some of them are very bright and candy shop sweet with strawberry candies and vanilla, almost like a light whiskey profile. And that would be more of like a batch 15 if you really want to go blast from the past. There are also kind of the middle of the road batches, slightly bitter, a little extra barrel char influence, and that would be like a batch 13. And then finally the dark fruit bombs, which are my personal favorites from this Stagg lineup, in particular batch 12. Then you have some other ones along the way, batch 14, batch 16, batch 22A, probably a recent favorite would be that 22A. But this is just kind of a long way of saying there are a few different main profiles of Stagg, and this one, once you get past that watermelon Jolly Rancher note, which reminds me more of that candy shop sweetness, you just find this beautiful balance underneath it of incredible dark fruit notes. And so this kind of leans into the profile that I tend to favor, except for that one top note. So let me kind of drill down on this a little bit more specifically now. All right, so the first thing that really stands out to me underneath that watermelon note is a really sweet vanilla quality to the whiskey, almost like a vanilla extract. I'm also picking up on something that I get only occasionally on these Stagg batches, which is kind of like this toasty breadiness, kind of like a fresh baked goods note. And I think in this case, it really reminds me of like a toasted cornbread. I'm also getting those standard notes, those standard kind of dark fruit syrups, dark cherry, that kind of Buffalo Trace grapiness, dark berry kind of notes. And I really, really like that profile for these Stagg releases. And then another thing that I'm picking up here is one of my personal favorite notes just across any whiskey really that we're talking about, which is kind of a cola note. So I will often reference different kinds of sodas when I'm talking about whiskey. I think it's relatable, honestly, if you're reading or listening to reviews. If I say root beer or ginger ale or Coca-Cola or Dr. Pepper, people typically know what that means. And in this case, I get a really strong Coca-Cola presence on the nose here. So I love the fact that this feels caramelized and reduced a little bit. And honestly, like at 127.8 proof, this is on the lower end of the proof spectrum for these Stagg releases. But I've got to say that I actually enjoy this on the nose more than a lot of those barn burner high proof versions, because this doesn't burn your nostrils out. It feels full and rich and sweet and balanced, and I do appreciate that about it. Of course, yes, I have my one complaint, my one watermelon Jolly Rancher note, because I just don't think that belongs in a whiskey that feels, really nicely aged and put together like this. I think it's just an outlier. But once you get past that note, the nose of this whiskey is fantastic, and it really makes you want to dive in, and so that's what we're gonna do right now. Cheers, guys. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this now. This is a really fantastic palate experience for 24B. It has a slow and steady crescendo of spice and flavor throughout the sip. Even though this was my first sip of whiskey for the night, it did not blow my palate out whatsoever. It kind of reminds me in some ways of 23C, but I know a lot of people didn't like that batch, and so I want to kind of qualify saying that and not scare people away from this batch. I think this has more spice, more presence than 23C. 23C felt almost like a glorified Eagle Rare 10, and frankly, that's a great profile for me. It was crushable. It was just kind of simplistic, but focused on those dark fruit notes. I think this has more complexity than 23C did. I think this has some of those dark fruit notes that I really liked in 22A, even though it's not quite as rich, not quite as heavy, dense. It's a little lower proof. It's also not as explosive. But at the end of the day, it straddles a lot of these different profiles that I've liked as of late. 24A, for instance, which was a brighter, more candy shop sweet profile. This has elements of that because of that sort of watermelon note. And again, it has the dark notes, it has these kind of baked bread notes, and the palate delivers all of those to you, again, in a very balanced way. And I like a slow and steady development on a whiskey like this 24B gives you. So I think first impression, first sip for me is less about focusing on the notes. I say this all the time. It's more about the experience. How was the mouthfeel? How was the development? To me, this is a really, really solid whiskey right out of the gate. It's not special in the sense that it's got like one thing that it, over exaggerates in the sip and it's really amazing. It's just a freaking solid whiskey. And so now we're gonna go back for a second sip and dive a little deeper. Yeah, so the second sip starts off with kind of like a torched creme brulee type note, the top of a creme brulee. Very sugary sweet, simple syrup. Again, that kind of vanilla extract note right off the bat. And then as it works its way back, you start to get into some of those cola notes. I would say that Coca-Cola note comes in as kind of a secondary thing as the development starts to ramp up on the palate. Then once you get to the mid palate, this is where all of that kind of dark fruit sweetness takes over. And as it's falling now into the finish, which is a very long finish, again, as it ramps up slowly, it also ramps down slowly, and that's a really nice quality to have. I'm getting a lot of brown sugar in the finish and a lot of kind of sweet oak, and again, that kind of toasty cornbread note, which is interesting, and it's not a very common note on a lot of stags. So through and through, I mean, this is a total recommend for me. It doesn't take analyzing this for 15 minutes for me to say 24B is a total recommend. And this kind of flies in the face of what I said a few nights ago, actually, on a live stream I did here on the channel where I first cracked this open. I had been sipping other whiskeys as well, and that watermelon note on the nose stood out to me so strongly, and I couldn't get past it. But as I've left this in the glass before I shot this review right now, I sat with this for a while and I just nosed on it, walked out of the room, came back, put it next to some other things. And after about 20 minutes, that note rolled off. And frankly, I think a lot of people are actually gonna like that note. I'm just not a big watermelon person, whether it's in, my candies or just eating fruit or in my whiskeys. I think it makes things feel a little bit young, but it might be a welcome addition to the profile for a lot of people out there. Some other people might not even get it as watermelon. They might sense that to be a little more like a strawberry candy note, and I would totally understand that as well. But by and large, I think this is a recommend for me. I think you pay up to $100 for this whiskey, even though Stagg is usually around 60 if you can find it at SRP. That's kind of a pie in the sky type dream though. So I would pay up to $100 for this. I think it's a really solid batch. I'm gonna be curious to hear what you guys think in the comment section below. So like, comment, subscribe, check out the Patreon for some barrel picks, exclusive content. Thank you again, Justin, and cheers. I'll see you guys soon here on Drums and Drams.